Hallo und herzlich willkommen beim Leseschwäche-Podcast mit Frank und...
Ich bin der Alex.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen. Wie ja letztes Mal schon angekündigt, haben wir diesmal ein Interview und das führen wir, glaube ich, größtenteils nicht auf Deutsch, aber vielleicht halt auch ein bisschen auf Deutsch. Deswegen wundert euch nicht. Und wenn ihr euch fragt, was es überhaupt für ein Interview ist, hört die letzte Folge vielleicht noch mal. Da stellen wir das halt auch noch mal vor. Und sonst könnt ihr auch immer noch 1,5 Wochen oder eine Woche, Frank, am Gewinnspiel teilnehmen?
Ja, je nachdem, wann wir diese Folge rausbringen. 1,5 Wochen oder 3 Tage, ja.
Ja, weiß ich nicht. Das ist meine Introduction. Deswegen sage ich mal, willkommen Kian.
Ja, danke, dass ich mitmachen darf.
Und hallo Frank, natürlich.
Hi Alex. So, let's switch to English.
Yes.
Awesome. I feel a lot more relaxed already.
Perfect. Lean back. We are nice in this podcast. We try to be nice. We are not good timekeepers, but we are nice.
Okay. No worries.
So, Kian, how about you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience?
Sure, with pleasure. So I'm Kian N. Ardalan. I write fantasy books primarily. I am working also, on a sci-fi book. And what I'm most well known for is a book that's going to be coming out in just over a week's time, 11th Cycle, a Dark Souls and Berserk inspired novel. It is dark fantasy. It is grimdark. It has a big content warning. And yeah, I love everything that has to do with fantasy. I love everything that has to do with grimdark fantasy. And I am, I'm very excited. That's all I can really say.
Okay, so it's like your dream. You wanted to write grimdark fantasy?
I just wanted to write books. Specifically, I wanted to write like fantasy books, I think. A little bit of sci-fi. But, and I think growing up, I wasn't very good academically, except like there were some things I was good at. One of them being creative writing. It was in English class when we had a creative writing assignment. That's the only time when people really paid attention to me. I went away from that a little bit, still, leaning towards some creative stuff. And it wasn't until 2017 when I was on writing prompts, which, you guys talked about this in, And 2017, I just took part in writing prompts, and people were like, hey, write more on like several short stories that I did. And before I knew it, it just became a thing. People were paying for my writing, and it really took off before and I don't know, I like it. The money is nice. And please don't stop paying me. But I think it's getting the messages from people that are like, this is something, amazing, and I love this, and this is such a cool book. And I just got a review today, which was like, this is essentially a perfect novel, and it's like that's the stuff that's like, I want to keep writing just to get more messages like that.
Yeah, okay, I can understand. It's a great feeling.
Yeah.
I think that's so. And Alex, maybe you can also relate there. So I think that's something every artist wants. I think it's not the money making in the forefront. It's touching other people's hearts, right? So, and getting a reaction. If it's good or bad, it doesn't even matter, right? So even a bad review for you
depends. But if it's a good reaction, it's really nice. Or just when I think when people are paying you for your talent, it's a great feeling. So
yeah. You do have provocative artists. Like there was one, no idea what his name is, but who submerged a model of Jesus Christ in piss, and that was obviously just to get a rise out of people. And I think it's like, it depends on what your goal is. If you're an artist that's trying to get a rise out of people, then that's your goal. But yeah, I mean, like Alex, I saw your artwork. I really, really liked your style.
Oh, thank you. It's always nice to hear.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. Prime example.
But, like when you're writing, what's your process? That would be really interesting, I think, for me and for Frank also. You just have an idea and you start writing, or you're like, I have this idea, and you're starting researching like months and months and months, and then you're starting, or how's your process?
Obviously, and I'm sure you know this, it depends on which author you ask, right? Peter V. Brett, who wrote the Eleventh Cycle series, he has very clearly said that he doesn't ever start writing a book until he's outlined. He swears by it. I'm a pantser, so no outlines. I just sit down and start writing. That being said, for 11th Cycle, I did have to have the lore and the world building down on paper, because I needed that to be consistent. I didn't want to then, contradict myself later on in the book. I on top of that, I would also say that I may not have an outline, but I know that there are certain scenes that I want to take place in the book. And I know how the book will end, and I know what the book will be about. And I think that, at least, I would almost say for every writer, this is a good thing to have. Every writer that pantses, but for me especially, I need to know what direction it's heading so I can fill in the blanks beforehand.
Yeah, but then it's just more like it's the outline you have in your head, because if you know how you want the book to end, I think that's really important.
It is. It depends on who you ask. I think most outliners will say, no, that's not enough. You want to know each chapter what it is for. Each chapter you want to write down what's happening exactly, and then they actually write the book itself. And I don't do that. I know Mark Lawrence doesn't do that either. And I'm giving a little bit more of a detailed answer. If you were to ask Mark Lawrence, he would be like, no, I just pants, and that that's his answer. But I do think it's also partially where I have in my mind, this is the theme of the book, and I try my best to be consistent with that. But yeah, that was definitely the case for 11th Cycle, where it's there are certain notes and themes that I need to make sure that we're consistent.
Yeah. So actually, it's funny. We had some guests before, and one of our guests who was in the show, I think a couple of times, Dennis, he actually has a podcast about the writing process, and he said it's fine what works for you, right? So if Panzer works for you, but they're different aspects. So there are different types of writing styles, and each of them is correct if it works for you. And to find what works for you is the more important part, right?
Absolutely. A lot of times as well, it was it's always different, but 11th Cycle. A while ago, I had an idea for a D&D character, a cleric who smiles lovingly, is tender, is caring, and but their motivations when it comes to helping other people is wrong, and that they believe that the highest act of selflessness that they could ever achieve is to sacrifice themselves to save someone else. And I kind of saved that concept for a D&D character, and it's something that trying to keep it as vague as possible. It's something that I then somewhat used in 11th Cycle, because I'm that is such an interesting character study, and I wanted to explore that. So that happens too sometimes.
Yeah, perfect. So we're talking about your writing style. What would you say are your quote unquote favorite authors and favorite books? What would you say?
I've already mentioned Mark Lawrence. I can't. He really got me. I was already into fantasy, but he really got me into fantasy. I recently have become a really, really big fan of Pierce Brown and his Red Rising series. I'm currently reading a brilliant book, Gunmetal Gods by Zamil Akhtar. I'm trying to think. There's so many good books out there. I think I would have to say that Mark Lawrence's Broken Empire series is like Hall of Legends for me, because it's not just about the quality of the book and everything. It has a lot of sentimental value because it's was my real first like plunge into fantasy books and reading those, and yeah.
Okay, so more the recent works, I would say. So some people would quote, I think, Lord of the Rings or something at that point. So, but it's interesting to see, and it's. Would you say it also got you more into, since you are very close in contact with Mark, and through this publishing and writing bubble, I would say, through all the people you got to know there, the social bubble there, would you also say that making authors nowadays more approachable is also something that helped you more into the profession?
Absolutely, 100%. If there's anyone who's like interested in this field, it is such an underrated and understated advice. Create a social network, and also there is this belief like, oh, it's a famous author, he's not going to have time for me. Trust me, most authors out there, with exceptions, there are some people who just like to distance themselves from their fans because they don't like, and I get it, everyone's different, but there's never harm in reaching out. Chances are that they will love chatting to a fan, and there is never not a day where I don't appreciate getting a message from someone saying, hey, I loved your book. And there are some people who reach out to me, even yesterday, I think, asking, hey, I'm really, really lost about the whole publishing thing. You seem to be doing really well. Can you give me some advice? And I love doing that. I really, really do, because that's how I got a lot of help. It wasn't actually Mark Lawrence to begin with, but Bryce O'Connor, I reached out to him. He sat down with me for like a 2-hour call and was really, really helpful. And a lot of advice he gave to me was paramount in the success that I am having today with 11th Cycle.
Good to hear. Would you say, so Alex, jump in if I ask too much. So did you consciously decide to self-publish, or was that more like a choice that was forced to you, but you got to like it? I know that the question could be hard because it's hard to get a distributor, right? So a publishing company to realize what you have.
That's a really good question, and it's definitely the latter. But that's like, so to give a little bit more context, what happened was that to get traditionally published, it's a lot of work. You need to reach out to an agent, and the agent represents you, and then the agent will reach out on your behalf to a publisher. And the process for that can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years if they like your book. And here's the thing. A lot of the times, they don't care so much about the quality of your book. They care about, is there a market for this? Because there are a lot of good books out there. It's not so hard to find a good book. The question is there a market that will want to read this concept of a book that you've created? So at the time, I'm like, this is too much work. I just finished writing the fantastically underwhelming epic. I already wanted to start 11th Cycle. I'm like, this is way too much work. I just went the self-pub route with fantastically underwhelming epic. I'm like, maybe I'll try TradPub for 11th Cycle. The funny thing is, the fantastically underwhelming epic, I made a post on Reddit. It blew up. Podium Audio reached out to me, and they offered to buy the audiobook rights for the fantastically underwhelming epic and 11th Cycle, or the whole of Mistland series. And it's like, this is a really cool opportunity. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, sure, I'm in. What I did not know at the time, and which, in hindsight, it actually worked out brilliantly, is that because I sold the rights to Mistland as well, the chance of a traditional publisher picking up 11th Cycle is pretty much zero, because they will not pick up a book without the audiobook rights.
Yeah, they want the whole package. Yeah.
Exactly, because you're talking about like 40% of the market. So it's like, okay, whatever. I just went the self-published route. I did have one agent who was really, really big. I think he represented Patrick Rothfuss and Brandon Sanderson at one point.
Okay.
And
Wow.
he's like, send me the manuscript. But he's like, this is not for me. And I totally understood. But yeah, no. And then I'm like, hey, look, it's an 800-page book. The chances of a publisher wanting a book that big are very small. So I went the self-published route. I got an artist and everything. And I have to say, honest to God, I'm glad it worked out the way it did. I have a lot more control over my IP now. And I got to choose a cover that really works for it. I don't think it would have gotten this much attention without the cover. And I got to market it the way I wanted to, which is like the Soulsborne angle and Berserk angle, which is doing wonders. And it just worked out. And but here's the thing: there is a very possible future where I may end up selling the foreign rights to publishers abroad, which is also a very common thing to do.
Yeah. So hoping for the audience of the podcast that the book will be released in German sometime in the future. So coming from this question, would you think that self-publishing is also kind of like an opportunity for aspiring writers in 2023? I think because of the internet and all the possibilities you have at your disposal, it is also a valid way to start your career and not wait for 5-10 years to be suddenly discovered by somebody.
Absolutely. Here's Here's what I will say. If you can afford it, there's almost every possible, and like if you can afford it and you're willing to put in the time, it's almost always worth it to just go the self-published route rather than the traditional route. Unless the traditional publisher is offering you like $500,000 in advance, or like, even more conservative. Like if they're like 60,000, sure, that's 60,000. You'll have the backing, and they're investing in you such a big advance. That means that they're really going to put in the effort to make sure it sells well. However, like I said before, TradPub, they really care about the saleability of your book. So they're going to look at you and be like, hey, do you already have a following? Which determines if you're going to make a sale or not. And what is happening, an astonishing amount right now, is that they wait for you to make it as an indie author before they approach you and say, we want to represent you as Trad. And this is happening an insane amount. The author of Grey Bastards, recently Aparna Verna with The Boy with Fire. It's happening a lot. And I mean, it's also a really big difference, right? So just going with ebook, a TradPub may give you about 10% royalties with every book sale. If you go in indie, so independent, you will make 70% royalty. It is a big difference. Yeah. So the question is, can you afford it? If you can, I would genuinely argue that there is currently a renaissance in the publishing industry, and the fact that there are no longer gatekeepers, the publishing house, you really do have every possibility to succeed without a publishing house. And final note on this, look at Brandon Sanderson. His name is so much bigger than the publishing house that represents him, that he is like, you know what, my name is more valuable than you guys. So he just went indie because he can make more money that way. And it's, no brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I think that's valid, but you also have to market your book or your books, and that's another different thing. And it's just what I'm seeing in the German indie market, because I was looking around a little bit, and the covers are mostly really horrible.
Yes.
And the saying, don't judge a book by its cover, but sometimes it's really hard. So when you're looking for at the cover of your first novella, and now you're looking at Mistland Book 1, there are worlds between them. So
yeah, and you say don't judge a book by its cover, and in a perfect world, sure, but unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I truly believe that a good cover can also add to the experience. And I will say this in terms of quote unquote marketing. So marketing separately from like cost for the cover. Typically, if you go through trad, at least in the English market, you're looking at an average of about $10,000 in advance. But then you still have to market the book yourself as a trad pub, so that's not going to matter. But the costs for everything else are covered. It's just that specifically. But yeah, I've not been a huge fan of German book covers, even in trad pub. But yeah.
It's sometimes funny to see like international books getting German covers, and it looks like, ooh, what did you do there? So that you didn't get the book. So clearly you see that in the covers. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's a whole other topic when you're like the name for the books in German. Sometimes it's also the translation is horrible.
Yeah. I'm not so entirely sure about like the book translations, but I always found it weird how the German movies, like they changed the title, but it's still an English title, and I never understood that.
Yeah, best example for that is Kick It Like Beckham. So it's the German name, and in English it's called Bend It Like Beckham. So I don't know why we need to change that from an English phrase to an English phrase, but maybe the Germans don't get bended. So
yeah,
I think that's the point. The Germans know how to kick, not how to bend.
Okay, but fair. But like, for example, Horrible Bosses versus Kill the Boss.
Yeah, it's that total different. Yeah. So
yeah. I'm always thinking of the Stephen King book, Salem's Lot, and in German it's Brennen muss Salem, and that's what's happening at the end of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, we have that also with Wheel of Time. So there's also the trend in Germany that books get split up. So longer books get 2 or 3 books. And for example, for Wheel of Time, when they published it, they totally spoiled the stories in the names of the individual books. And it's like, when you get to that point, you say, thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, if that happens with 11th Cycle, and they probably will split it in at least one half, then I really hope they're not going to do that.
Yeah, I hope that they don't put 11 bicycles on the
cover. That would be great. I wouldn't even be mad. That would be hilarious.
So, coming from the general questions, anything we missed or any other questions, Alex, we have? Because then I would suggest that we...
Okay, I would really like to know, are you practicing, or it's like, I mean, you're writing like 10 hours and then you're saying, wow, that's bullshit. And then you're starting again. Is it happening to you, or are you just, I don't know, keeping everything and saying, yeah, I can take, even if you don't like the session from one day, then you can take something from it, or I don't know.
It's each day that I sit down and start writing, it's I don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of an adventure. And there are some times when I'm writing and I'm like, 3-4 chapters, I'm like, something's not right. And it's a growing feeling. And that's why what I like to call is like, or like what I like to say is, you have all of these books that are about the craft, about how to write books. I never use them specifically to know how to write a book. I use them as a diagnostic tool. So I then, go back and read through and start to understand, like, why do I have this feeling like this is not working here? And I did that recently with a book where I'm like, there's a character that I introduced, but the character is not actually showing up a lot. So it's about like diagnostic and why that's not working. And then I go back and start to, and then once I do diagnose it, I'm like, okay, how do I fix this problem? And that's basically the process. And it's open enough that it's flexible. In terms of how I practice, lots of reading, and lots of just awareness of the prose that I use. And, when I read prose in another book that I really like, I'm like, why does this work the way it does? Why do I think it's good? And then even when I'm done writing for the day, I'm still thinking about the book throughout the day. And then eventually, inspiration comes and I'm like, oh, that would be so cool. So it is like really a constant endeavor.
Yeah. I thought that because when I'm drawing or painting or something, and it's just like never leaving my mind, even if I'm going to bed and I'm just thinking about that, I could draw that differently or that, or I could start again all over again and do something completely different. Yeah. So it's never leaving my mind. So it's also when I'm looking at something or I'm looking at other drawings, paintings, I'm also like, okay, he made it like this or like that, and it's never leaving me.
I think that's such an important process for any creative work. And that's why, like, I did a 24-hour stream, but other than that, I'm really keeping my hands off of gaming, because that really does hijack your brain, and that makes you focus on the game. So it doesn't give your brain, a chance to wander and think about, like in your case, the drawings and, oh, what could I change here and stuff. So I think that's also something that's really important, to just let my mind rest and process what I wrote that day.
Okay, so you're not gaming so much.
I used to a lot more. I mean, like I got my dream PC, and then I played Cyberpunk. I played several games that I've wanted to play for a while, and then just like recently, it's because the whole career thing is taking off that I'm like, I'm only gonna ever game for games that I'm really, really excited to play. Like I'm really excited for Silk Song, for example, and I binged Elden Ring when it came out. So games that I'm really, really passionate and excited about, those are the ones that I put aside. I'm like, I'm gonna, save my gaming time and then binge this and then go back to just focusing on writing. Yeah.
Yeah. Should we switch to your book now?
That's a good, I think that's also a good take to switch over to the book. Because first question regarding 11th Cycle would be, what were the main influences for your book? I know we talked about it, but for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Obviously Dark Souls, but more than just Dark Souls, Hollow Knight as well was a big, big part of it. And I remember I was playing Hollow Knight and I loved it so much. And then it made me return to Dark Souls. And I loved that. And I was watching Vati videos. And one video in particular from his collection was about the Ringed City DLC. And that left such an impression on me. And I really wanted a book written in that kind of style, and I looked it up. Are there any proper books inspired by Dark Souls? There are books like Dark Souls. There was Malazan. There are some others which are kind of like, maybe you'll get a little bit of that itch, but I never found anything that properly had that sort of connection. So I'm like, it's kind of like that meme of like, fine, I'll do it myself then. And I just identified a market. I'm like, there are obviously other people, because this is a post that's being made on like our fantasy every week. It's crazy. And then I'm like, it would be great that like if my book is actually marketed as that people will, and they have started doing that. There was a recent post where it's like, hey, any Soulsborne, kind of stories, and then people mention my book several times, even though it's not out.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, you did? Yeah, it was really, really cool. Other than that, Angel's Egg is a movie that really, really left an impression on me. Piranesi, obviously, for like his artwork, and I know that there are being connections made with like Piranesi and the architecture of Bloodborne. But yeah, I think those are the main, and obviously Berserk, but those are the main ones.
Okay, yeah. The last episode we were speaking about your influence, what could it be? And I also was thinking of Angel's Egg because it's the artist is Amano. He's making or made all the Final Fantasy artwork. And when I'm seeing his drawings, I'm always thinking of the world, which is like Dark Souls, because you cannot grasp it really. I don't know, it's like really mysterious, and it's not like a perfect drawing he's doing like in Angel's Egg. It's not looking perfect, but has a certain atmosphere which is really great, and it's like gripping me always.
Absolutely.
And that's the same with your book, and that's really great for me because I really love that. That's also why I love to play like games like Dark Souls or Elden Ring. I loved Elden Ring. Frank and me played Elden Ring together.
That's cool.
So many evenings, and it's always like, oh yeah, it's so great. Let's go together into this world. And now I can go into the world like this in your book, and that's really great. So
that means a lot to me. Thank you. And absolutely, I did aim for that kind of sensation, that kind of feeling, to the point where, like, now that I've written book 1, not only do I want to at some point, like in book 3, probably like after I publish book 3, start getting a lot more artists on board and start like really having a lot more paintings of the world. But I think that if I decide to go like the route of turning this into a tabletop, kind of world, I would totally dig doing that. Yeah.
I think it's Steamforge. They're always doing that on Kickstarter.
Yeah. Maybe I'll reach out to them. Steamforge, if you're listening, I'm easy to find.
But then maybe it will take 6 years.
Maybe.
Yeah. Doesn't matter, but the Kickstarter is there, and it's always really successful. So I think they make like it's the Bloodborne card game they made or something. The Dark Souls board game.
They did a lot. I think they just recently had one for Elden Ring. I think it was.
Really? That's cool.
There was a quite recent one that was also some about a FromSoft game. Yeah. Kickstarter and all that. What the world we live in, right? So
yeah. I think it's cool. At least like there's now an avenue where we can fund the creations that we want to fund, and we can bring these products right before the customers that we think will like them, instead of having to worry about gatekeepers. But yeah. And there was something else that was also on my mind, but I totally forgot what it was.
Maybe it will come back. So what would you say what you wanted to capture for 11th Cycle from Dark Souls, for example? What was important to have that feeling in the book?
Several things. I think at the bottom of the list is just the aesthetic. Hauntingly beautiful was the key word that I always used. But more importantly, I think I wanted to capture that idea of what is being described as environmental storytelling in a book format. And that was something that was really challenging, but also really fun to tackle. Part of it was this idea of, I'm writing about the world, about the story, and there are certain things that are happening in the background. They are hidden subplots, and there are things that are being mentioned that readers might think, okay, that's a throwaway line, that's totally irrelevant. But then when you get to a later scene, you're like, oh, these two parts are connected. And that's a big part of what I was going for. And a lot of it was also like leaving, there's some parts where I leave it vague enough that a reader can theorize for themselves what happened. And that's also part of it. Bringing in that, Berserk angle, it was a lot more about catharsis, about in the most like hopeless and despondent of moments, that you can still move forward, persevere, and find hope. and it was a lot of that too. Yeah.
I mean, that's just guts.
That is literally just guts. I will say one thing that this is something that I personally have a suspicion of, and I don't know what you guys say to this. I think in the Western design philosophy compared to Eastern, in video games at least, you have the Elden Rings and the Breath of the Wilds versus Horizon Zero Dawn. You have the philosophy of like, hey, here's an open map, go and find whatever you want, compared to Horizon Zero Dawn, which is covered in question marks and exclamation marks, and I think because it is this idea of like, okay, Western philosophy, you don't put something in the game unless you want the players to actually find it. Otherwise, what's the point of putting it into the game, right? It's about maximizing that. While Elden Ring, Breath of the Wild, the design philosophy is so much more different. It's far more like, I want everyone to have like their own unique experience compared to someone else. And I try to adapt that as well into 11th Cycle, this Eastern design philosophy that I don't think is very common in Western literature. Because I think a lot of times in Western literature, it's like, this is not clear. Like, oh, it's about that, then make it more clear. Like, state that it's about this. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that because it's not about that. I want people to discover that, or theorize by themselves or have their own conclusions. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it depends. If you're just like reading, I mean, Lord of the Rings, you're getting lore and stuff, but you're not getting so deep. But then you're reading the Silmarillion, I don't know what's called really in English, then you're getting all the lore.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what you're reading. And I think in like great big fantasy sagas, there's always lore that it's just, here it is. And then there's lore like, let's explore that deeper. It's like just what George R. R. Martin is doing.
Yes.
He had like Song of Ice and Fire, and he says, these are the Targaryens. And then, I don't know, 20 years later, he's writing, and this is the backstory of the Targaryens.
Yeah. I do think that the work of Tolkien was from a different time. I'm curious. I wonder if there are any people who would say like, oh, maybe the times have changed and what publishers look like. I don't know if Lord of the Rings, if it were, probably not, if it was given to somebody today in this market day and age and being like, hey, this is a book I wrote. I wonder if it would get published because it's just so dense and so heavy. And it's a classic work of art that maybe would not be appreciated by a lot of like agents today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be the case. So the market is very, very geared toward quick successes, and they don't take time to give an author, for example, the opportunity to realize his art and his it's harder, I think. So let's say the attention of the people maybe shorter today because we are so overwhelmed with input all around us. So drafting something could be harder for the people. So they're going for that.
It's like also a lot, like Lord of the Rings. I have the feeling he would have wrote the book even if there would have been no money.
Yeah.
And if you're, I don't know, like reading, because also in the podcast we're talking about Harry Potter, because Frank never read it before. And there you're seeing clearly, okay, you have that one book. And then, oh, it's a success. Oh, I need to have new ideas. So it's not really planned, all the books. And I think you notice it when you read it, especially when you're not a kid.
Yeah, true.
Exactly.
And coming back to 11th Cycle. So what would you say, how much of the thing that will happen in the 11th Cycle and the world behind that, give it a rough percentage, is already realized in your mind?
Of like the full 4-book series?
the full 4-book series. So interesting fact that you
4 books.
4 to 5. It depends on how the events unfold for book 4.
Okay.
And depending on that, I'll be like, okay, you know what? I think I can put more into this, or it deserves more, and then I'll become 5. So at the very least 4. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Robert Jordan said the same, and we ended up in 14 books. So be aware of that. But yes, the story in the books, but also the word behind that. So sometimes I would say also a question towards when you start writing, you're kind of fleshing out certain parts of the world, but maybe there are more connections. And I think we talked about it, Alex. Did you already think about what in each cycle has happened in rough?
Yeah. As I said before, I kind of include enough in there that it gives the impression that I fleshed out the world entirely. And that sometimes, I learned it from an episode from Writing Excuses podcast, where it's like, you don't need to know everything. You just have to mention enough, sprinkle some lore here and there so that the reader thinks, wow, this author has everything figured out. No, I don't. No author does. But that being said, the world at its entirety, I would say that I know, I'm confident enough that with everything that I have already right now, that I could, write everything about it. And there are a lot of mysteries. Like, for example, what is the rot? What are the forgotten? I know the answer to all those things. So conservatively, I guess it would be reasonable to say 80 to 85% of the world I do have figured out.
I think it's great because now you're writing Mistland, 5 books. And then you can go back and say, I'm writing Second Cycle, 11 books. 8th Cycle, 9 books.
Absolutely.
Thank God.
and
so much possibilities.
And I'm so happy to see you get excited, because exactly. And I've left it open-ended in that sense because of the fact that I could explore more. Like, one thing that I was considering recently is I might do a novella about the Kingdom of Estria and the robbery of the Elder King's Eye. I think that would be a great, novella prospect. And at the same time, it's not just the cycles or like the seeds that came before that I would love to explore. I think there's just because each cycle is approximately 1,000 years apart from each other. So I think there's so much there that I could also just explore and enjoy.
Hey, you also could, I don't know, write 5,000 years into the future. And then the world is completely different. Then it's a science fiction book.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? In about 5 to 6 years down the line, I will remember that, and once the series is ended, and then we can discuss it then.
Yeah, but I think it's great potential what you could do with your world.
Yeah.
And I think that's so great because it's just starting for us, the readers. So it's really great. We don't know where you're going, and I don't know. It's really exciting, but I think the hard thing. That's always a hard thing for me. I have to wait now. That's horrible.
At least it won't be 10 years. Wink, wink.
Yeah. I don't know. We will see.
I've started writing book 2, and it's coming along really, really well. I don't think there are going to be any issues, at the very least with book 2.
But if you're writing book 6 and you're really famous and you're thinking I don't need to write it. I could go play Elden Ring.
Here's what I'm going to say for me personally, and this is, I could not do that. I couldn't even enjoy Elden Ring because in the back of my mind, I'll be like, fuck, I have homework, like I still have this stupid book that thousands of people still want to read. So I don't know. I think that would end up being just my focus, I guess.
Do you think, so interesting question and maybe not very tied to 11th Cycle.
Yeah.
How likely is it to write yourself into a corner as an author?
Oh, so likely.
Yeah, because I think some authors that we are waiting for more books from, I have the feeling that they have ended up in a part in their story where they don't find kind of like a way forward how they would finish their story without, because they set themselves a world where they made it impossible to find a really fulfilling ending for the readers, because everything that would come would be disappointing.
So it's really difficult. So I'm not gonna talk about any specific author because I don't know exactly what's going through in the back of their head. I don't know what actually is happening behind the scenes. I will say that there are some individuals who've stated, Patrick Rothfuss and Door of Stone, that we're not sure if he actually knows what's behind the door. And I think for a lot of people that's a concern. And I would say maybe it's true, maybe it's not. If any authors are out there, if there's like a big plot device or a big plot point, make sure that you know what's behind it, how it's tied to the narrative. Otherwise, you will write yourself into a corner. And on the other hand, George R. R. Martin, I think a lot of people just theorize that he wrote so many different narratives and characters that ended up like being disposable and dying, that it's kind of like, okay, how do you tie together all of these loose threads now? And I think Pierce Brown does it really well. He is, he has killed off a lot of characters.
Yeah.
But his and I was so gutted with one death in particular. But with Pierce Brown, at the very least, the narrative still moved forward with every death. Like there was still an overarching narrative that didn't fall apart just because a main character died, and I think that's a big issue. It happens a lot, and I think it will happen regardless. I have already made a promise to myself long ago that it doesn't matter if the subsequent books are going to be less, have less quality. I owe it to any person who ends up reading my book to give them closure, and I think that's a responsibility that every author. I'm not going to say that not every author has that obligation, but at the very least for me, I feel like I have an obligation to my readers that they need to have closure, even if it's a worse book than it started out with.
Yeah. So we now have it on tape, Alex. So 10 years in the future, we will put you on that. Yeah. No, just kidding.
I won't be able to hear you. I'd be too busy playing Elden Ring 4.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. So
just wait and see. Maybe in the future you have to name every boss in a video game with your initials.
That would be sick. FromSoft, if you're listening, I'm totally down.
Yeah, I have a question. And how do you come up with the names for the I don't know, for the characters? Or you have normal names like Frank, for example. Yeah. It's a really normal name, but then I don't know. How do you come up with the names? I just want to know.
Sometimes if it's a character which is more grounded in, so for example, Frank is a character that's more grounded in a almost Victorian era / Renaissance era kind of demographic, with like the village of Baskeson. So that was fine. Frank, some people have said like it clashes with the names. It didn't bother me when I was coming up with them, but that felt fitting. It felt like the name of somebody who's a little bit upper class, maybe middle to upper class, and that fit. Nora, I named her so because of the concept of like Nora referring to the word for light. So, like, for example, in Arabic is one example. I'm 100% sure there are other languages as well, where the word nur, or the name Nur, means a ray of light. And Nora is such a brightly shining and unyielding fire that it felt fitting for her. Delilah referring to, a delicate flower. Erifil, on the other hand, is more like it just sounds something a little bit more regal. It flows, and it's also it's a little bit almost elvish, I would say. It's But then I think one of my favorite names that I came up with is Ivaris, which came from the word, like, because I really have a thing or an interest in Ivar the Boneless. And
okay, Vikings.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ivar the Boneless in history, like, it's believed that, okay, there was a mistranslation because they used Beinlaus in the original, which it was thought like it was mistranslated into meaning like boneless, but Bein obviously in German also means leg. But so Ivar part I took in, and then I also thought of the word ivory, and I thought, like, okay, this guy is like, his skin is quite off, or their skin is quite often described as being like ivory or alabaster. So what sounds again very fantasy-like, very regal, and I went with Ivaris.
Yeah, but it's really, really cool to hear how you're coming up with that name. That's really nice.
I'm glad you think so.
Yeah. Sometimes especially in fantasy books, you can come up with so cheesy names in your fantasy books that it takes you out of the reader out of the story. And I felt, and it's good to hear that you have kind of like this process of giving things names and having a train of thought behind that, because I delved into some other fantasy authors who are very renowned for their work, and they also worked with names and all that. And I think even Tolkien, he had the names before and the language before the real plot came up, and he kind of evolved a lot around names and words. So it's kind of interesting, and I think that's the reason it works so well in 11th Cycle. And the name Frank didn't take me out of the book, actually.
I'm glad. I do know that there's one blogger, and she seems to be very excited to read the book, except for the fact that there's a character, they share the same name, Cassidy, and I don't know how she's going to react. I'm very excited to see that.
Oh yeah, Cassidy, I remember.
Yeah.
Good. I would say after the 50 minutes mark, let's. Or is there any question, Alex? I don't want to put you off.
It's not a real question, but you really like to see people suffering.
Okay, I'll be honest.
No, it's more like a joke. You don't have to answer that.
I'll be
really
honest.
But that also reminds me really much of Berserk, because there's so much suffering.
I do get some enjoyment out of people messaging me as like, what is wrong with you? Or like, what did this character ever do to you? And there is a little bit of enjoyment to that. And it's really, really funny, because unanimously across all boards, whenever somebody says, oh, you got to that part, everybody knows what you're talking about. And if somebody says, what part are you talking about? He's like, okay, so you didn't get there yet. Yeah.
True. That's true. And I wrote Alex when I came to that part, I think.
Yeah.
Didn't write you, I wrote Alex.
Oh.
Yeah. So,
what was your reaction, Alex?
I'm not shocked when I'm reading something really hard for some people. I just think it's, how should I say it? I like that you're going to an extreme, or you're going in an extreme way. And I think for me, it's cool. For the character, it's horrible.
Yeah.
but I like to read it because I wanted to know where you want to go with that. So I think for me, it's really okay when people are dying or horrible things happen. I don't know. I read Poppy Wars.
Yeah.
And there's so much suffering. Oh my God. There's everything from, I don't know what happened to Chinese people in the last 100 years that's happening also in the book. So it's really, really suffering here, suffering there. So I don't know. I think it's okay because you wanted to say something with it, and then I'm fine with it. I don't need to really like every scene that I'm reading. And I also don't need to, I don't know. I have to say that to you. It's like you have 4 main characters. And it's like, I'm starting, I like this one. I don't like that one. Then you're reading and after 200 pages, it's like, I don't like this character anymore. Now I like you. And it's really fun. So
that's cool.
I don't care that, one person is really, really suffering. But in the end, they're all suffering for a greater good.
I was actually curious what your reaction was to Frank's message. Because I don't know what Frank ended up writing, but I imagine it was like, what the fuck? And I was wondering what your reaction was to that, but it's okay.
I don't know. What was my reaction, Frank? I'm not sure anymore.
I think you agreed to me a little bit because I said, wow, this took me out of the book a little bit at this moment. And I realized that I'm not fond of those scenes when they happen in books, but I got, but it took me a time to get over that and to realize where it's going. And that moment, it was like, oh my God, those poor people sometimes.
Just sometimes, yeah.
And reading your book, the Bard before that, the underwhelming Bard before that, you kind of have different expectations at that going into the book, and you kind of like even got it more.
It's a big tonal shift, a
little bit, yes. Then, if there are no questions anymore, thank you, Kian, for taking your time for this interview. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and looking forward to the next book. And I hope we are in for a treat in the next book.
It's going to be wild. I think that a lot is moving forward, and I think you guys are. I don't know if you guys are prepared, but I hope you'll like it.
Okay, that sets the tone. I'm afraid. But not speaking about the next book. Please, everyone out of there, buy this book especially if you are into Dark Souls and Berserk and all that, and be aware that there might be scenes that can be hard, but it's worth it, I would say. So,
and even if you don't like Dark Souls, you should read this book.
That's what I wanted to say as well. So read this book.
Yeah. Thank you for being on our show.
Thank you guys for having me. I look forward to coming on again sometime soon.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Then have a nice evening, everyone. And I will finish the episode now. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.